Hi everyone, and welcome to video number 25 on the American West. And this one, ladies and gentlemen, it's all about the reservations. In the previous video, we looked at how the buffalo was virtually wiped out, and we saw that the main reason for that was that the government wanted to force the Indians to move onto the reservations, and they wanted to force the Indians to remain on the reservations. Well, here's a question. Why did the government have to force them? Why did the Indians need forcing onto the reservations? Have you got any ideas? Well, the main reason, ladies and gentlemen, is that life on the reservation was totally against the Plains Indians' traditional way of life. Now, let's see if we can fully understand that. Here's a little scenario for you. Imagine this. You're all young people. I'm an retired old history teacher, an old buffer, but you're young. Imagine you have no access to your mobile phone, no computer, no television, no PlayStation. You can't go on to, I don't know, things I don't really understand, TikTok, Instagram, Spotify, Apple Music, Netflix. You cannot go on any of those. Also, you can't go to the cinema with your friends. You can't go bowling. You can't go to the ice arena. You can't go to football, netball, rugby, whatever it is. Forever. How would you feel about that, ladies and gentlemen? Any ideas? Would you be happy? Would you accept it? And that's what it was like for the Plains Indians when they were forced to move onto the reservation. It was a complete change of lifestyle. And it was a change that they did not want or welcome. There was no applause. There was no clapping from the Indians about being forced on to the reservation. What do we mean, clap? Well, let's have a look at the four things that upset them. Number one, the sea conditions. They were terrible. Not enough food, not enough rations. The crops often failed. Medical care was poor, awful. There were many diseases, many deaths from things like flu, measles, whooping cough. The conditions on the reservations were dreadful. L for land. The reservations were the worst land. Not very fertile, very tough to grow the crops, which links back to the traditions. The reservations were also getting smaller. More land was taken away from the Plains Indians so that it could be sold to the white settlers, so that everyone makes money. Manifest destiny. The A, agents. The government appointed officials known as Indian agents. Their job was to look after the reservation and look after the Plains Indians and help them make this big change. But many of these agents were corrupt. They were given money by the government to help the Plains Indians, but they kept it rather than spending it on enough food or enough medical care or enough rations. So these people are making things worse for the Plains Indians on the reservations. Now, Sitting Bull, we've seen him before in previous videos, Battle of Little Bighorn. Sitting Bull was such an important and powerful and respected chief, he refused to deal with the agents. Well, he could because he was so important and respected. But some of the other lesser chiefs, they dealt with the agents because they were bribed. The agents would say, look, we'll promise to give your band or your tribe extra food, extra rations, extra clothing, if you cooperate with us. Divide and rule, if you like. And the P from clap, the police, the Indian Agency Police. Now, some of these were actual Indians themselves from various tribes. They joined the police and helped to control the reservations for the government. Why? Bribery, quite simple. They were rewarded with better food, better clothing, better shelter, etc. So, life on the reservations would not have got a clap from the Plains Indians. Hopefully that will help you remember some of the problems. Now, there were other ways as well, ladies and gentlemen, that the government tried to control the Plains Indians and undermine their traditional way of life on the reservation. The first one, I just mentioned a while ago, Sitting Bull, the tribal chiefs. Now, in the normal thing, the tribal chief was an important person out on the plains, often would make key decisions of when to move, where to move, whether to fight, whether to make peace, etc. But the tribal chiefs lost power and influence. 1871, the chiefs were no longer allowed to sign the treaties. They always had been, but not from 1871. Declining influence and power of the chief. Easier to control the rest of them. By the early 1880s, council members instead, not the chiefs, other Indians, they looked after the reservations. And again, these council members could be bribed. 1883, special courts were set up to take the chief's power away, so he could no longer be the sort of judge and jury and rule on his own tribe, whether they should be punished or rewarded. Previously, he was powerful. Now, the courts did it. 2 years later, 1885, the US federal law courts took over. The government is totally in control. The chiefs had lost. That was another way of undermining the Plains Indians. Another way. You ever heard of a band called Pink Floyd? Maybe not. We don't need no education. Very, very famous song that they had. I think it was number one at Christmas one year. We don't need no education. Education was used as a tool on the reservations against the Plains Indians. How? The children. They were the future. The Indians certainly didn't need the education or want the education that was on offer to their children on the reservations. Indian boys and girls were sent to schools, often far away from the reservations, away from the influence of the tribe, away from the old traditional way of life. They had to go. If their parents refused to allow them to go, guess what would happen? Rations were cut, food was cut, clothing cut. Can we see what's happening here? They're being forced. And when they arrived at their new school, new ideas, a totally new way of life. They couldn't wear their old traditional clothes. Instead, they had to wear white man's clothes, suit, tie, dresses for the girls, etc. They weren't allowed to speak their own tribal language. They learnt nothing about their old traditional way of life. All of their old beliefs were no longer allowed. Praying to their spirits, doing their traditional dances, all of that was stopped. It was a very tough military-style schooling. They were forced to become Christian. By 1887, 2,000 pupils were in boarding schools. For example, Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania, miles and miles and miles away from the reservations. Also, 2,500 were in day schools off the reservation. The government is controlling the children so that the children grew up without a knowledge of their old traditional way of life. As one education official said, kill the Indian in him and save the man. In other words, don't kill the child, kill the ideas that were traditional to his tribe so that the child grows up having no awareness of what life used to be. That was the plan. Terrible plan, in a way, but it worked for the governments. A little bit harsh, a little bit depressing. Here's a joke to try and raise our spirits. What is king or queen of the classroom? What object is king or queen of the classroom? I don't know. What object is king or queen of the classroom? The ruler. Sorry about that. I think that's the last joke. You'll be pleased to hear. Now then, Indians were no longer allowed to hunt. Remember from last video, there was no buffalo left anyway. They were not allowed horses on the reservation. Indians were brilliant at riding horseback. Now they couldn't do it anymore. They couldn't practice. Their way of life was being changed. They couldn't do their traditional things, whether that was riding, hunting, counting coup, the game, touching their enemies and running away. All their old ways were stopped. Instead, they were forced to do new things, farming, ploughing, reaping, etc. But they didn't want to do it. Here's another one for you to think about. Imagine, for you, think of the subject you enjoy least at school. Now then, ladies and gentlemen, you better not have said history, you cheeky monkeys. If you've said history, I'm going to be furious. Now, seriously, think of the subject that you really dislike, or think of the subject you find most difficult. Have you got one in your head? If it's history, fair enough. Now, imagine you have to do that subject all of the time, every lesson of every day of every week. And your favourite subject, whatever that is, you can never ever do that again. How do you feel? Are you looking forward to that? Well, that was exactly the same for the Plains Indians on the reservation. All the things they enjoyed, all the things they liked to do, wipe out. All the things they hated, they were forced to do. Life on the reservations. No wonder there was no applause from the Plains Indians. So there we have it. We've only got one final video to do before we've completed the whole course. That's on the government's attitude and the Dawes Act. And that's coming ever so soon. As ever, I hope it's been useful. All the best now. See you later.